today, we have a rare treat. We have an opportunity to hear from 6 of our past Grand Presidents and one of our current Grand Presidents. Excellent. It's going to be an intimate setting. What we wanted to do is have each of the Grand Presidents give an overview and a perception that they had when they were Grand President. And then also at the end of this, what we'll do is open it up for questions. So if you do have questions for anyone up here on the panel, feel free to ask them. We definitely want to give a perspective of what it's like to be Grand President, as well as just what was happening in the fraternity at the time when each of these distinguished brothers were at the helm of our fraternity. So let's first start by having each introduce themselves. And Bill, if you could get started, that'd be great.
I'm Bill Tatum, a graduate of University of Southern Mississippi, Gamma Tau Chapter. I used to say Brett Favre School, but now that Mitch is here, I can say Mitch Simmons University. I was Grand President from 1975 to 1979, and that's when we had the admission of the females. And if you don't think I didn't have my hands full, they kind of glossed over it in the history naturally, because it covered probably a thick manual. But we had some rough times then, and fraternity's doing excellent. I have no problem in the world after I stepped down. Brother Mallonee took over and continued.
I'm going to remain seated if you don't mind. Mike Mallonee, I was Grand President from 1979 to 1983. I'm from University of Oklahoma, Beta Epsilon Chapter, and I followed Bill, and we did have some tumultuous years early in Bill's administration regarding the admission of women, and by the time I got to be Grand President, things were starting to move in that direction a lot more smoothly, and I think that to me, that was one of the highlights of my Grand Presidency, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Randy?
Thanks, Mike. I'm Randy Hultz. I was initiated in 1978, charter member of the Untitled Chapter, and I served as Grand President from 93 to 97. And since these guys are seated to my left, I should tell you that Brother Tatum was the Grand President who initiated me and my other charter members. And Brother Mallonee was the Grand President when we went to our very first Grand Chapter Congress in 1981 at Mackinac Island.
I'm Norm Cromberg. I was Grand President from 97 to 2001. I'm an initiate at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, out the Delta Chapter. I did succeed Randy. As Tim asked, maybe the biggest thing we were working on at the time was our governance structure. Prior to my term, we didn't have provincial councils. Was able to get those in place and streamline the organization a little bit. And then also, just so everybody understands, Mike Mallonee signed my membership certificate. And I was the Grand President when we elected the first female Grand President, which was Kathy.
Thank you, Norm. Kathy Jahnke. I was initiated in 1980 at the Tatum chapter, Northern Illinois University. I served as Grand President from 2001 to 2005. Obviously, you all know I'm the first female Grand President, so I don't really spend a lot of time dwelling on that, because most of the delegates at the convention didn't even realize that a woman had never served in that position before. It was the alumni that were really more concerned about everything. Significant things that happened during my term is that I had to implement the new governance that Norm had worked on. So I was the first Grand President to have 5 provinces, to really deal with the provincial councils and how all that was going to legislatively work with the Grand Chapter. I also had to deal with 9/11, which was something that I dealt with within the first 2 weeks of my election, and I had to cancel my first public appearance because of that. So, and just as a note, because you guys had all mentioned it, Mike Mallonee was also my Grand President.
My name is Mitch Simmons, and I am the current Grand President. I graduated from the University of Southern Mississippi. I'm a member of the Gamma Tau Chapter. Bill Tatum was at my pledging ceremony, and I've often talked about how he provided a much bigger picture of Delta Sigma Pi to the brothers in my chapter with his presence, we never really looked at our chapter as just this was the fraternity. He brought the national fraternity to life for us. So I think a lot of the reason that I've stayed involved with the fraternity for over 24 years is because of that very first night at our pledging ceremony and Bill standing in front of us and talking about Delta Sigma Pi being more than this chapter of 50 people at Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And Mike Mallonee was also the Grand President when I was initiated.
Common theme.
So, and let's see, I followed the first woman Grand President. I think I was at that event that you had to cancel your travel plans to after September the 11th. That was the Career Achievement Award banquet in Atlanta for Mike Mescon. And we decided that despite everything else, the show was going to go on, and I'm glad we did. So far, I would say the biggest things in my term of office, obviously, this Centennial Grand Chapter Congress, and all the excitement around that, and obviously the tragedy of the term was the reason we're in Orlando, having to deal with the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and Rita that moved us from New Orleans, where we had originally planned on celebrating, and bringing us back to Orlando. This is the first time we've been in the same city for 2 conventions in a row since the war years, when the Grand Chapter Congresses, I believe, were really just board of directors meetings in New York City for a few times. So.
Mitch, if you could answer this question and pass it down as well, what impact has Delta Sigma Pi had on your life?
It's been unbelievable. I think back to where I was at the time, growing up in the middle of nowhere, Mississippi and Louisiana, and now looking at where I am today, I see most of my friends are Deltasigs, and not necessarily from my own chapter. I'm in touch with 3 brothers from Gamma Tau chapter on a regular basis. One of them is sitting at the table here with us tonight, and Jimmy Pendergrass, who's very active with fraternity also. But most of my closest friends are Deltasigs, but from all over the country. We travel together with a group of friends from Houston. We've traveled to Europe a few times. The impact it's had on my life, just the personal development, professional development, has been phenomenal. I think it has really made me into the professional that I am. My career, it changed me completely. I grew up on a dairy farm, and I wanted to get off the dairy farm, and never imagined that I would do anything like what I did. If you've ever been to a dairy farm, it's not very pleasant.
Cue the photos, please.
Those may be of Sparky, I'm not sure.
Excellent. Kathy?
Oh yeah, there was one.
I married a Deltasig.
Don't forget
I
that.
can't forget that. She's not in the room.
Thankful.
Thankful.
All right, we got it on tape. Don't worry.
She'll see this. But Velvet and I met in Dallas in 1985 at the Grand Chapter Congress there, and didn't like each other. About 3 years later, I moved to Georgia after I left the staff. I worked for the fraternity for 2 years after I got out of college, and I moved to Georgia and became a district director, and didn't really know anybody in Atlanta, so we just kind of started hanging out together. And a year later, we decided that, this kind of worked, and we've been married for 18 years now.
Okay, the impact that Delta Sigma Pi had on me, definitely on how to be a leader and being able to develop my leadership style. It's a great opportunity to kind of test different methods and ways of working with people and working with teams. And through that, I've been able to achieve a great deal through my own professional career.
Interesting question, and hearing the responses. Occurred to me, it taught me how to be a business professional and how to operate in a manner well above most other people in the business community. And I attribute that a lot to being able to, in essence, operate a local business, that being the chapter, seeing how a major corporation functions with its annual or biannual meetings, with our board meetings and Robert's Rules of Order, and all that. And I've come to realize over 20-some years that most people don't have that kind of exposure to how business should operate in a manner outside the classroom. And I've found that extremely valuable over the years.
I think it has clearly had a significant impact on my life, and I think when it really hit me was when I reached the age where I realized I've been a Delta Sig longer in my life than a non-Delta Sig. You know, most of you out there are probably in your early 20s, and there will come a point, I hope, that you stay actively involved with the fraternity when it just hits you. Wow. I've now spent the greater part of my life as a Delta Sig than I did as a non-Delta Sig. That's had a huge impact. Like Mitch and Kathy and Norm, all of my good friends are Delta Sigs. One of the things that can happen when you get elected Grand President is you find that you have to many times put aside relationships outside the fraternity to focus on what you need to do for the fraternity as Grand President. And sometimes it can be difficult to reestablish those. All of my friends, close friends, are Delta Sigs. It's had a huge impact. The other one, while there are people up here will likely chuckle at this, most people don't know that I was very much an introvert, was not very good at speaking in front of a group at all, until I joined the fraternity, and it got me out of my shell and gave me opportunities to get in front of my chapter first and then other opportunities, and to where now I'm fairly comfortable talking in front of big groups. That's a huge change the fraternity had on my life. So, Mike.
The disadvantage about being at the end of the line when the mic is being passed is that what you were going to say has already been said by everybody. A lot of the things I learned at the chapter level. I learned how to talk better. I learned how to get in front of people without being as nervous as I used to be. I learned how to dress professionally. I learned how to run business meetings. When I got involved nationally, I learned even more about how to run business meetings. And Norm said, I think, you will be aghast. You'll be amazed when you get out in the business world, get involved in business, get involved in organizations, serve on a committee or as an officer on a board or something like that in a charitable organization. Find out how really badly business meetings are run. I was amazed when I started getting involved in organizations outside of Delta Sigma Pi, because as a Delta Sig, as an undergraduate, you learn how to run a meeting. You learn how to run committees. You learn how to bring things to the front of an agenda and to move things forward and get things done. And lots of time, lots of extra time in organizations around the country, lots of useless time is spent in meetings getting nothing done. Now I realize this is coming on the heels of the first 30 minutes of the meeting this morning where not a lot was done. But the fact is, being a Delta Sig, as an undergraduate and as an alumni and hopefully as a national officer, you're going to learn a lot of these things. I mean, you look around the room at the meetings this week, you see people, brothers, dressed professionally, with a good attitude, actually awake, taking things in and coming to meetings like this and being attentive. And you're learning a lot of that as a Delta Sig. And these are some of the things that I learned. And the other thing that has really made an impact on my life as a Delta Sig, probably the most impact, has been my friends. Everybody up here, every single person up here, I've known for at least 20 years. Some people for 40 years. Every single person. The first time I remember meeting Norm was when he drove me to the airport in Minneapolis at the North Central Regional Basketball Tournament. Now, I didn't remember that until he reminded me years later. I didn't know who the hell he was. He was just some undergrad.
He was asleep.
Well, I was just asleep, yes. We had a long night. And, you know, and Kathy, again, was at Mackinac. I didn't remember that until she showed a photo of us at a party at Mackinac. And, pardon me? It was an interesting photo. She showed it to a room full of 200 people. Okay. And Mitch was a chapter consultant in the central office. In fact, he's the first chapter consultant to become Grand President, right? Or what they used to call chapter consultants. It's now educational and leadership consultants. So I've known Mitch for what, 25 years? You were on the staff in the early 80s?
1985, so 22 years ago.
Right. Mitch, Randy, I was at his initiation in 1978, his installation of Iota New Chapter. And Bill, I met at, I think, my second Grand Chapter Congress in 1971 when he ran for national office for the first time. So we're going back 30 years at least, 35 years. And all of these people have remained friends. I think every one of them, except Mitch maybe, has stayed at my house at some point over the last few years in their travels. So these are some of the things, the people that you meet, and I'm sorry to hog the microphone, I'll be through in just a minute. Well, I learned from the master. You may not know this now, but the people that you meet, not only in your undergraduate chapter, but at your Grand Chapter Congresses, and for most of you, for a lot of you, I would suppose, this is your first Grand Chapter Congress, will become lifelong friends. You don't know that now, but they will. So get the best you can out of it.
I think when I really realized Delta Sigma Phi was on a national basis, I had just served 13 months in Korea as a first lieutenant, and I was in charge of the maximum security area over there. And you people that hear that nuclear weapons weren't in Korea, yes they were, and I counted them every day. I was the officer in charge of that area. I came back and settled in Sacramento. Epsilon Phi chapter had just begun in the 60s, and we had an alumni chapter there, which Nick Windishausen, if y'all met him yesterday, and I believe he has gone now, departed. Not this earth, but the meeting. He was here yesterday. He had started the alumni chapter. It takes Mallonee a while to catch the jokes. There was an alumni chapter, and they welcomed me there. And I got real active, and that's why I was able to continue on service. I came back to the Grand Chapter Congresses. This is my 25th to come to, although I have 24 bars. The central office is lacking one, New Orleans at 87. But I missed 2 of them because I was in Korea. And I just enjoyed myself and made lifelong friends there, as Mike had talked about, in Sacramento. Although I was a little boy from Mississippi and an ex-funeral director and all this kind of stuff. Well, it came to me, Mike, to talk about the area that he just mentioned, meeting. I was called to jury duty in Sacramento, and there were 2 PhDs suing each other. And I thought, boy, I have got to be on this jury. I thought these were the most educated people in the world. Make a long story short, it was over rental and subrenting and all that stuff. And now you're the legal people to understand this. But anyway, when we got to the jury room, everybody turned around and said, who's had meeting experience? Well, I immediately held up my hand. Well, there were 3 teachers in there, other public servants and all of this, and none of them held up. I said, yes. And I said, now, if y'all will bear with me, we'll be out of here in 15 minutes. And so the teamwork came into play. I asked one guy, I said, take the evidence, don't pay any attention to the numbers, line it up as it happened. And bye-bye, bye-bye, bye-bye. And we went down and we were out of there. And these people came up at the end of this and they said, my God, where did you get this meeting experience? I said, this is the most phenomenal thing. I've never seen anything like this. My fraternity, and I explained to them, and I said, 3 of you and you're teachers. Every time I go to see a teacher, they're coming from or on the way to a meeting. So my point, and I think Mitch's point, Mitch moved from Mississippi to Atlanta where we had a very active alumni chapter. And I had told him at the time, I said, get involved no matter what you do, wherever you go. And this is the importance to you undergraduates and alumni, to get an alumni chapter started somewhere. They're very important support to the chapter. I would not be here today if it were not for the Sacramento Valley Alumni Chapter. And we've got our party, the 31st one is going to be held at my residence on December 1st. So I'll put a plug in there. I hope all of you can come. But it's a great thing with Delta.
Great. I have one part. What is your favorite Deltasig memory? You've touched on it a little bit already. But what is that one memory that...
Well, I said this and broke it yesterday at lunch. I think it was Mitch Simmons, the 2nd member of Gamma Tau, becoming Grand President. That was greater than the feeling that I had when I was elected Grand President. And I think 25 years apart and another one in 25 years wouldn't hurt a thing.
Favorite Deltasig memory? In the summer of 1981, and I know that was before all of you were born, except for Joe and Lisa and Gus. Our Grand Chapter Congress was going to be held at Mackinac Island. Anybody know where that is? Yes, thank you. Mackinac Island is at the top of Michigan, where all the Great Lakes come together. And we were having our Grand Chapter Congress in August of that year. In June, I got a telephone call from a collegian from our chapter in Menlo, who was home visiting his parents for the summer. And he said, I want to come talk to you about the Grand Chapter Congress. And I said, okay. So he came by my office that afternoon. And he said, we exchanged the usual pleasantries, and he looked at me and he says, okay, I'm a skydiver. And we're going to fly a plane over Mackinac Island, and I'm going to jump out and land on the lawn in front of the Grand Hotel, which is where our convention was going to be. And I said, you can't do that. It's against the law to fly planes over Mackinac Island. He said, well, I'm gonna. He says, we're even going to park the plane across the island in the forest on the mainland, and we're going to take the doors off the plane so I can jump out faster. And on Sunday afternoon, the first day of the Congress, at 4 o'clock, we're going to fly a plane over, and I'm going to jump out. And I said, you're really going to do this, aren't you? He said, yes, I am. Isn't there any way I can talk you out of this? No, there's not. I said, how can I help? He said, well, you can have a bunch of people. He said, I'm going to do this at 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. He said, you can have a bunch of people with white flags or handkerchiefs or something right in the middle of the lawn. And the lawn in front of Mackinac, you all know, is about this length of a football field. It's a magnificent, great lawn in front of the Grand Hotel. He says, I'm going to jump right in the middle of it. I need some people with markers, white flags or handkerchiefs down there. I said, okay, I can do that. So Sunday morning, the day of the Congress, I went to what was then our biggest Animal House chapter, Alpha Omega at DePaul. Anybody here from DePaul? And I told them the story, and I said, I need you guys down there with some handkerchiefs or something marking the spot. Can you do this? Oh yeah, we can do that. There's 15 of us. We can do that. We'll be down there. And so we got it all mapped out, and I said, before they left, I said, okay, one other thing. We can all get in a lot of trouble over this, so please don't say anything to anybody. And the last words out of the president's mouth were, you can count on us. At 3:45, I walked out the front door of the Grand Hotel. There were 500 people on the lawn. Everybody's looking up in the air. And so at 3:55, Randy's over here nodding his head. He remembers it well, I'm sure. This was his first Congress. At 3:55, here comes the plane circling overhead. And at 4 o'clock, this guy jumps out of the plane with a Deltasig flag strapped to his leg. And when he hit the ground, you may not know much about airplane history or whatever, but when Charles Lindbergh landed in Paris and the mobs thronged him, that's what happened. 500 people rushed toward this guy, and there's a picture of me shaking his hand, giving him the grip, and in the Deltasig for, I think, November 1981. But anyway, you would think that Alpha Omega, and by the way, nobody got in trouble over this, you would think that the members of Alpha Omega would be forever in my debt for including them in this momentous event. So what did they do to repay me? The next morning at the break, at the first business session, they came up and they had this beautiful girl with them. And she came up and gave me the grip and says, Brother Mallonee, you know, thanks so much, and blah, 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 blah. And 3 of them handcuffed a bowling ball to my wrist. And did not take it off, did they, Randy? Did not take it off for the rest of the day. I'm standing up there at the dais conducting the meeting with a bowling ball chained to my wrist in fear that this thing was going to fall off and take the rest of my body with it. And so that's the way things started out for me at Mackinac, and it just got better.
There are, one of the nice things about getting to this point in your involvement with fraternity is you have tons of memories, lots of them, and many favorites. But honestly, I think the one that if I had to single it out, it was I still get choked up over this. It was being at the initiation of my younger brother and watching him actually become a brother. That was a really big deal, really big deal.
Randy summed it up because you get so many of them. Riding a steer through Grand Chapter, through the banquet, going around the corner, seeing your father, getting initiated, and then initiating my wife as the headmaster. So we could go on for hours with the stories we wanted to.
Okay. Yes, we all have lots and lots of stories, and when you first get initiated into Deltasig, you never really know where you're going to end up years later. And of course, I ended up getting elected Grand President, and I think getting elected Grand President for all of us was a great memory. But one thing that I was able to do is the honorary initiation of Roger Jahnke. I never would have imagined that I'd have the opportunity to initiate one of our founders' family. So that was a real special time for me. And then on top of it, I did pretty good at that initiation. I memorized everything. And until you've been in front of the Grand Chapter memorizing the initiation ritual with all of these guys watching you and being the first woman to have to do it, it was pretty nerve-wracking. So I will always remember that.
It's difficult to say one memory is the most memorable. There's so many things I think of, and being the sitting Grand President, it's still evolving, I think. The things I think about from the last 2 years, reactivating Alpha Chapter was a phenomenal event. Having them back, and a fabulous group of students there that rebuilt that chapter into what it is today and not what it was before. Proof that there is a God. The things that I remember that come to my memory quickest, I think, go back to the mid-'80s when I was on staff. And as Mike Mallonee mentioned before, my first year I was the only consultant on staff. So I got to see a lot of chapters in that year. At one time I counted them, I've forgotten, but I was on the road 3 weeks out of 4. And Dean Ferguson, who many of you know or may have met this week, he's here. He was my boss at the time as Director of Chapter Services, and he had put together a grueling travel schedule for me. But the opportunities of meeting brothers as a 22-year-old guy right out of college, traveling from Ohio to California to Georgia to Florida up to Massachusetts, it was a phenomenal experience. And I have friends today that were collegiates that I met as a chapter consultant. I remember when I was first elected to the Board of Directors as a regional director back in 1993, we had a retreat up at Oxford, Ohio, at central office for all the board members. And there was this guy, I've forgotten his name now even, but from Ohio, East Central Regional Director back then. I was sharing a room with him. I didn't know him at all. He was sitting in the room waiting for me to get there because when he was pledged, he had to memorize my name. And I thought, for God's sake, that's silly. But the memories like that I thought, I thought the same thing when I met Mike Mallonee because he signed my membership certificate. Of course, now I know Mike. Well, I am looking forward to seeing your new house in Tucson.
Very nice, Mitch.
I'll get invited one day.
What questions, and I have a couple more, but what questions do you guys have?
Where's the house in Tucson?
Yeah.
There's a mic in the center. Please, what questions do you guys have?
You gotta have some. Come on. You all been here a week.
Hi, Matthew Zarner, IRSI, Corpus Christi. What is the greatest challenge that you've faced in your presidency?
Dealing with this group. Well, I wouldn't say it's the greatest, but it's fun dealing with, but that's probably one of them.
I think the greatest challenge that I faced, and honestly, I know Tim was going to ask us about what were the major milestones, but the biggest challenge that I faced as Grand President is that in August of 1994, Mike Mazer, who had been Executive Director for over 10 years, left staff. And we went through almost 9 months of replacing that position. And in many ways, certainly the directors in that office stepped up, but they had to report to somebody. And to this day, the head of the firm that I worked for before he retired still refers to me as the unpaid executive director of that business fraternity that you were involved in. I mean, it was literally for 9 months. We were on the phone every single day with the directors, reporting into me, here's what the issues are, here's what we're recommending, do we run with it, do we take this to the whole board, are we going to sign off on it? For me personally, and even for the organization, we went 9 months transferring, transitioning between one executive director, going without one, and then filling the position. Having said that was my greatest challenge, if you were to ask me what was the top accomplishment that I think occurred during my Grand Presidency, there are two. Hiring Bill Schilling as our executive director is one. I think he has done a phenomenal job for the fraternity, continues to do a phenomenal job, and I will always look back, and Mike was involved and a few other people were involved on the selection committee to narrow the field down to then bring to the executive committee and the board, and I think that will always be certainly something that I will remember as the legacy, if you will, of my Grand Presidency was we hired a phenomenal guy to fill some very big shoes.
Yeah, that would be my biggest challenge was also regarding executive staff. When I was Grand President, again, the summer before our Grand Chapter Congress in Mackinac, Michigan, the executive director, Ben Wolfenberger, at that time, called me up and said that he was going to quit. And my first words were, well, will you stay past the Grand Chapter Congress? And he said, no. And I said, okay. So I got on the phone with the board, and we had a subset of the board at that time called the Executive Committee, and the Executive Committee really ran policy in between meetings of the Grand Chapter Congress. And so we got everybody on the phone, and the Assistant Executive Director wanted the job, and frankly, we didn't want him very much, and long story short, he ended up leaving the staff. And there we were 2 months before Grand Chapter Congress without an executive director or assistant executive director. One of our regional directors called me up and said he wanted a job. And I said, you mean you want, which is now the RVP, one of our RVPs called me up, said he wanted the job. He'd been a friend of mine for several years. And I said, you mean you want the job of assistant executive director? And he said, no, I want the job of executive director. Well, he's only 28 years old. I didn't know really much about him professionally. He sent me a resume, and I was very impressed. So I sent it out to the board, and we hired him, and he came to Oxford with barely 2 months to go until the Grand Chapter Congress. Now, you've been here all week, as Bill says. Surely, as business people, you can imagine what goes into planning a meeting like this. And so when Mike Mazer came on the staff, he put the convention together. A little bit had been done, but he put the convention together, he put the staff together, he hired some new people, and made things very easy for me, and I'll be forever indebted to him for that. And he was there for 13 years as executive director. That was the biggest challenge. And as far as milestones, Randy mentioned milestones. I mentioned women in the fraternity a while ago. How many of y'all went to the History on the Women in the Fraternity seminar earlier this week? Anybody? It seems like no big deal now, but it was a big deal then. Bill was the Grand President when we voted to invoke emergency powers to admit women in the fraternity. But when I became Grand President, they had only been in the fraternity for about 3 years. And we were still moving in that direction. And as far as I'm concerned, one of the things I'm proudest of was continuing to move things forward so that women felt comfortable in our fraternity and could start to rise up the ranks. And while I was Grand President, our first 2 collegians of the year that were women came on. Jessica Drew in 1979, and Marilyn Franson in 1980. And I believe, Kathy, you were in the fraternity about that time. You were initiated, I think, in 1980. Is that correct? Your first Grand Chapter Congress was 1981. It probably didn't seem like a big deal to you, but it was a big deal for us moving women into the fraternity and through the system so that it functioned very smoothly. And I'm really proud of that. Another thing that probably doesn't seem like a big deal now, but at that time, executive committee meetings were closed to members, and again, that was the equivalent of the board now, closed to the membership. We would have secret meetings. People knew where they were, but we would not let general members of the membership into our meetings. And I strongly encouraged the executive committee members to vote to admit the general membership in the meetings. They didn't want to do it. Well, we couldn't speak our mind. We wouldn't feel comfortable. And I said, well, let's give it a try. And finally, Bill was past Grand President, and he gave me a lot of support on that. And we finally got enough votes to open up the meetings to general membership. And the board meetings are still, by and large, open for general membership, are they not? And that's something I was very, very proud of. I felt like members pay dues. They deserve to know what's going on in the inner circle of their fraternity. And it's been that way ever since. So, again, I had a great mentor before me as Grand President. Bill gave me a lot of support on things like that.
Well, I would think probably the admission of women was my biggest challenge. I'm the only Grand President that sits here or was ever here that saw the fraternity in the governing body of both all male and then co-ed. So when I was elected Grand President, I was unopposed. Nobody wanted the job. And I had a lot of the old codger alumni came up and they said, Bill, we've got a dissolution clause, then we had a constitution and bylaws, both. And this was a problem. Brother Mallonee codified both of them and made one document to the bylaws that you have today. And there was actually a distribution clause in there of the assets in case the fraternity, and they said, Bill, you're going to be the Grand President to close down the fraternity. This is the end of us as we know it. And I said to the entire body, I said, over my dead body, I've worked all these years for the fraternity. It's not going to die. And at that time, I think the Grand President's budget, and I mean budget, was $2,000. And there's no telling what the 5 figures I spent out of my own pocket traveling around, and all of these brothers have done that. It isn't just me. It comes out of their pocket and they're giving. And I traveled all over. I had to visit with Sign Number 1 and all of these people, and they were ready to just close down the fraternity. During that time, we did not lose one chapter. And the unique thing was we already had a female member. She wasn't on the rolls, but she had her certificate, and I'll tell you that story. It's a long story. And y'all talk to Brother Mallonee about it because we were both involved in that. Then this lady that had been initiated with the chapter back in the 60s wanted to be the first female. And I said, no, we're not going to recognize the first female in the fraternity. We don't want to do that for obvious reasons. But we didn't lose a chapter. We kept on. And this was the greatest thing. I don't think we would be anywhere close to there today. And then the second term, nobody wanted the job. I ran unopposed for the second term. So I didn't have the expense of the brochures and the buttons and all of that stuff. I just used it on traveling. And what? The candy. And the candy. But it was a great experience, and thank goodness we had some level-headed people in the chapters and everything that lived with it. And I said upon that meeting, go back and read my speech, we will have a female Grand President in 25 years. And it was exactly 25 years when Kathy was elected.
Kathy, could you take the mic? What was your biggest challenge after hearing Bill?
Well, I had already mentioned having to deal with 9/11, and that was within a couple of weeks of me getting elected Grand President. And you really don't know what to expect with the job until you get yourself into it. And you're leading and overseeing the entire organization. And when you think about how many members we have and how many chapters, it's a really large job. And I still remember on 9/11, I happened to be home that day watching it on TV, and I don't think it was more than 3 hours later, Bill Schilling was on the phone with me. I mean, the country is in shock, and he's calling me up wanting me to make major decisions about the fraternity. I mean, all of a sudden it hit me. It's like, wow, this is more than just, standing in front of the Grand Chapter and making a few speeches. It's making some major decisions. And The questions that Bill asked me was, I mean, to him were very important decisions, but I was just kind of taken back. I mean, number one, he had asked me about the consultants. Do we want them to travel? Do we want them to drive? Do we want them to fly? Do we cancel all of their flights? We talked about canceling the league schools that were going to be happening that fall. We thought the people were too afraid to travel. Bill even said to me, what if my wife won't let me travel? What are you going to do? Are you going to make me travel? So it was just something that, you know, was kind of unexpected, but we worked through it. And as most of you know, the decision was to move forward and continue business as is. And we had a fantastic lead school season that fall. We had our leadership retreat, which was about 3 weeks after 9/11. So it was a challenging decision that certainly made an impact on my biennium.
Another question. Mitch, you have something?
Was Mitch's turn?
Yeah, next time.
Go ahead, answer.
The next 2 years.
Well, I'll do it one.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's really what brought us back to Orlando, much like Kathy, in less than a month after we left Orlando 2 years ago, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. And everybody saw the pictures of the Hyatt Hotel on TV. I think those windows are still broken today. They still haven't started rebuilding it. It was a big deal for us to have to make the decision to leave New Orleans, because the first thing we said is, well, the city obviously is going to need business coming back to it, and we want to be at the front of that list if we can. And we went to great extremes trying to find an alternative location in the city of New Orleans. We caught a lot of flack for that because there were people terrified of the idea of going to New Orleans, and people's parents weren't going to allow their children to go to a fraternity convention in New Orleans with all the crime that we're hearing about on television. But, you know, we held strong for quite some time on wanting to look at properties there. In fact, Bill took a couple of trips to New Orleans to visit hotels, do site visits. We tried to negotiate with the Sheraton Hotel right on the riverfront there to move there. The Hyatt would not release us from our contract, despite the fact that they have a shell of a building standing there. It was, I think, 8 months after the hurricane when they finally released us from the contract with them. In the interim, we had made the decision to move forward with other site selection, assuming that we would have to move it from New Orleans, and we looked at sites all over the country that would be attractive for our Centennial convention. And it was very controversial for us to come back to Orlando in less than 2 years. But I came down and visited this property myself. I was down here for an initiation. All the Florida chapters have a big initiation every year. 14 chapters get together. It happened to be here at the University of Central Florida. So I drove over here and met with the salesperson who we're negotiating with and saw the facility and said, this is the perfect property for us. It's at Disney World. Who wouldn't come to that? But it was a big decision.
Joe.
Joe Tacto, Golden Council. First of all, and I probably speak for the rest of the leaders that are in this room, it's been a pleasure and honor to have served with all of you at some point, and you've made an impact in all of our lives. I'm sure you know that. In any case, we're talking about the past. I'd like to ask a question about our future. What do you see, or what would you like to see for the future of Delta Sigma Pi?
I can tell you one of the things that we're looking at right now, we just started the process. Our central office has been in Oxford, Ohio for 50 years. So the building is 50 years old. Well, the two wings are 37 years old. But the main part of the building is 50 years old, and the bathrooms are 50 years old. And up until a year or two ago, the wiring was 50 years old. And in today's technology, things like that, we really looked at, is our facility going to meet the needs of our future? A few years ago, I think, Kathy, this was when you were Grand President, we seriously looked at moving the central office. Do we want to stay in Oxford, or do we want to look at other places to have our headquarters? Ultimately, we decided that we would keep it in Oxford. Now, having said that, I said, well, we have this building that while structurally is stable, it is not the office of the 21st century. At our meeting last January, I believe, we actually met with an architect, walked the property, talked about some ideas about how to modernize the structure, how to use it in ways that would help the foundation as far as recognizing donors, things like that. In September, we're actually going to meet with an architect again to talk about remodeling, expanding, modernizing the property so that it really will be an office for the 21st century, so we can stay in Oxford, Ohio for another 50 years or more.
Well, one of the things is definitely growth. If you look at how many chapters we've been installing over the years, it seems that professional organizations like ours are growing on college campuses, where as opposed to like the social type of organizations, they are losing membership because of the fact that their public image is not as positive. Deltasig, we have a great positive image out there. People are starting to value networking skills, and that's something that we teach in Delta Sigma Pi.
Joe, it's an interesting question because you were at the twilight of our careers. So Catherine leans over and goes, what's he talking about, our future or the fraternities? And ours is a lot shorter than the fraternities, obviously. No. But I started thinking about what that is. And since we're at the Centennial, you can reminisce and think about the four founders. And think about what they had in mind. And you heard a little bit of the stories with obviously the relatives here, the sons especially. And can you imagine what those four guys thought when they're on the trains going in and out of New York, starting this, what they would see today, and they would just be blown away. So you ask this on our Centennial, and I think I would sit here and say, what can the young people, the younger people in the room, imagine themselves in 25, 50, 70 years that this can accomplish when you lay the foundation like this? So to me, it's unlimited, it's intriguing. I would love to be here to see what they can do with what we've laid. And I don't know that we can predict it, but it's sure damn exciting to see what they're going to do.
Well, here's what I'd like to see in the future. I'd like to see twice as many collegiate chapters. I'd like to see 5 times as many alumni chapters. I'd like to see every collegiate brother in the fraternity from here on out graduate and realize that their Delta Sig experience is just beginning. That there is a lot more to this organization than just the brief amount of time you spend on a college campus. I'd like every single person to stay involved in whatever way that they can. On a very personal note, I'd like there to be at least 5 people who are at this Grand Chapter who met Bill or Mike or me or Mitch or any of us up here and said, wow, I'd like to be where they're at right now. I would love to come back for the 125th anniversary, because I'll be getting my golden helmet. I would love to come back and have an opportunity to sit up here and have people say about me, you were my Grand President when I came into the fraternity. You were the Grand President when I went to my first Grand Chapter Congress. And I was pretty inspired by that, and I wanted to stay involved. From a very personal, selfish standpoint, coming back in 25 years and having somebody out in that audience be up here with me to say, wow, I met you at a Congress, and here I am, and look what I've been able to accomplish too. To me, that's what I'd like to see. But the statistics would be great.
Well, 2 things come to mind. It's interesting, here we are celebrating our centennial, and Bill has been in the fraternity 50 years, I've been in 41, and we're doing a lot of reminiscing about the past. So we're talking about what we've done in the past, and it's an interesting question because now we have to shift gears and start thinking about the future and what would we do in the future. One of the things, again, 2 things. One of the things that I'm most proud of in the fraternity the last few years, one of the many things, is the affinity programs that we've had with corporate sponsors and businesses. It's something that has taken a long time to come about. I think Bill Schilling has been very instrumental in doing that. It's nice to see the Geico rep even stand up and make an insurance sales pitch. It's nice to see that because I know we're getting money from them. But we're also helping them out. They help us, we help them. It's a good program. It's run by Warren Buffett. And I'd like to see more of those business programs, not just for profit, but for help. And the other thing that comes to mind is Grand Chapter Congresses. Again, how many people are attending their first Congress? Probably a bunch of you. Okay, I hope it's not your last. I really don't. I went to my first chapter Congress at Mackinac Island, the first time we went to Mackinac Island in 1969, and I was incoming president of my chapter. It made a huge impact on me, just gigantic. I was floating high, well, all week.
Stop the tape.
What I really mean is, I was on cloud nine for 6 months after I got back. I mean, this is the first fraternity convention, national convention I've been to. It was wonderful. It was in a remote island location, and I met lots of neat people. I got to meet the Grand President for the first time, the one who signed my membership certificate. It's a big deal, and I'd be surprised if you all don't feel that way. Those of you that are attending your first Grand Chapter Congress, I'd be very, very surprised if you don't go back feeling exactly the same way I did, right? I mean, do you feel that way? Because it's a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun. You meet a lot of great people, and you're going to have some stories to tell, and you're going to go back, and you're going to want to make your chapter in the mold that you see it becoming. And so that's something that I would like to see. We worked real hard at making, those of us on the Centennial Committee, and then Bill and Randy and I, at least, up here, and we worked very hard over the last few years promoting this Congress and trying to get as many people to come as possible. We've got almost 1,300 here, right? By far the most we've ever had at Grand Chapter Congress. I would like to see double that soon. I'd like to see triple that or quadruple that in my lifetime, because I know what it did for me. I know what my first Grand Chapter did for me, my first Grand Chapter Congress, and I know what it can do for you. And the more people we get to these things, the more people we can share ideas with, to go back to their chapters and tell stories about fraternity involvement and fraternity friendships. It's going to help us better individually, and it's going to make us better as chapters, as various chapters, and as a fraternity. So my suggestion to all of you is soak this up as much as possible. You have a few hours left. Meet as many people as possible. Enjoy the fun. And I have one quick story to tell about Randy. He came up to me a few years ago and he says, Brother Mallonee, he says, you probably don't remember this, but at Mackinac Island in 1981, that was my first Grand Chapter Congress, you came up to me and talked to me for a little while and then looked me right in the eye and said, you're going to be Grand President someday. And I just couldn't pass this up. I said, well, Randy, I told that to 400 people that week. Somebody is going to be Grand.
But I was the only one that listened.
Well, actually, he was the only one I told. So. Well, yeah, but I didn't remember. If you look at that picture of us, Kathy, I'm surprised neither one of us remembered it.
I'm going to digress just a minute since Mallonee took as long. I'll take half as long. I was keynote speaker of Beta Kappa chapter in Austin, their 50th anniversary. And I walked through a parking lot, and here was a little old man and his wife standing there. He said, Bill Tatum, Grand President. I turned around and didn't know any of these people. Come on up to the room and have a drink. So I went up, and his wife poured us a drink, and we sat and talked. And I read all about you. Bye-bye, bye-bye, bye-bye. And I didn't know this guy from Adam. And he didn't ask me. He said, Deltasig has been very successful. But he said, I want to know, what is your one failure at Deltasig? What failure have you had? And that kind of hit me cold. I thought, well, there's a lot of them, but I'm going to dig deep. I said my failure is that I served with the first Collegiate of the Year, came on the board in 1971. I was Director of Alumni Activities. That position is no longer. But it wasn't because of me that it's no longer in existence, thank God. But anyway, we talked a little, and I said, I guess because I was so impressed with the Collegiate, the first Collegiate of the Year, and those with which I served thereafter, I had approached the foundation, then the old Delta Sigma Pi Foundation, and asked them to give that Collegiate of the Year a $1,000 scholarship to go for their master's degree. And I was turned down flat cold by a past grand president. And they told me no, because this is a political thing. The current Grand President wants to select who will be the Collegiate of the Year. And I said, you're full of it. These applications were mailed to us, you can't believe it, before FedEx even came to be. This huge thing came in the mail of all of these. I would go down and read all of these individual dissertations. And then I would rank them 1 through 10. And that's the way we voted, the executive committee. And send them all, or they were all sent on, or they were all sent simultaneously to each of the members. Then upon that, we had no idea how we would vote. I even got so conscious of it, I took it to my secretary and asked she and her husband to take it home, and they ranked them so I could look and be sure I was right. No, we're not going to do it. So I said, that was my failure, to be able to give them. He turned to his wife and said, Buttercup, write him a check for $1,000. I'll do that fund. I said, oh, no. I said, it'd be your luck or my luck. I said, you're a CPA. I said, it'd be your luck or mine. This will die. I said, we'll give out the first one. You or I'll drop dead, and that'll be the end of it. I said, I want it to die. So he said, what'll that take? And I said, you're the CPA. You tell me. I don't know. Okay, $10,000 at 10%. That'll take care of it. I said, that'll produce, I suppose, if you say so, $1,000 a year. He wrote me a check personally. I haven't even talked to the fraternity about this. Wrote me a check personally made out to me for $3,000. I went and put it in the trust account. When we came down there and had our first executive committee meetings, and Mike was talking about it being closed, I was the first Grand President held them outside of Oxford, Ohio. We had this one in San Antonio. He gave me $10,000 in bonds. And brothers, that fund, that was Sidney Sparks, who we had on our lost list. And you chapters have got a lot of lost brothers on there. And that fund today, with his death and his wife's generosity, Buttercup is 93. I took her to the installation of our San Antonio chapter. As we walked into the waterfront hotel, I said, Buttercup, 93 years old, the elevators are over here. And she said, let's take the stairs. And I said, the elevators for me. That fund is amounted to $200,000. The future I want to see is a building fund, and I have said this for the last 10 years, brick and mortar. We should have had it here. There are people that will contribute to that would not contribute to any other operation, especially your elder statesmen and so forth. I met a guy that's head of the Hancock Banking Holding Company, was a member of my chapter. And I said, boy, he's 80 years old. I said, we sure won't have you come to our chapter for a visit, Yamato. And I was at a BAC meeting on the campus with him. And he said, you let me know the next time you have a beer party, Yamato has a beer party, and I'll be there. So that's what a lot of them think. And I wasn't about to sit and explain why we don't have beer parties anymore, because you know that's been a long transition. Let's get a building fund started, let's update our loss list, and let's put this fraternity where it belongs in new headquarters within the next 20 years.
Fantastic. All right, to wrap things up, if you could each take 1 minute. Mike, 1 minute. If you could take 1 minute. What advice would you give as parting thoughts? 1 minute each.
Well, I think I've already given it. Have as much fun as you can. I don't want this to be misinterpreted, and I'm watching my lunch here, because I gave this advice to my chapter a couple of years ago. I've heard a lot of people say, I wish I had studied harder in college, I wish I'd have worked harder, I wish I'd have done this, and I wish I'd have done that. But I've never heard anybody say, I wish I had not had so much fun. My advice to you is to remember that you're also in college and you're also in life and out in the workforce to have a good time. There's a time for study, there's a time for work, and anybody that's worked with me knows that I believe in hard work and doing a good job on things. But also remember, you're there to have fun. Nobody's going to join your chapter just to work and do nothing else. Have a good time, enjoy it while you're here, enjoy it when you go home. Life is for having fun.
Ditto. And then to add on to that, those of you that are collegiates in the room, this is the beginning. If you're a graduating senior, this is not the end. This is the beginning. I will always cherish my collegiate days, but they are a very small part of my fraternal experience, and it's becoming a smaller part on a daily basis. Your future with this fraternity is in front of you. And I've always said when people ask me the difference between a fraternity and a club, it's not that we have Greek letters, it's not that we have ritual, it's not that we have secrets. What will make a difference between a fraternity being a fraternity and a club is you and how you treat it when you graduate. It will either be a fraternity that you belong to when you were in college, and it isn't anymore, which means you just turned it into a club, or it will always play some role in your life. No matter how big, no matter how small, it will play a role in your life. That's what makes Delta Sigma Pi a fraternity.
You're probably going to all hear us say some variation of ditto, but maybe chapter, and you get some idea of what it means to make it for life as a professional, and then make it for life for fun, your family, and your friends. Because when you depart, you'll be amazed at how long the night will last.
I will also say ditto. Those of you that are here now, you all know that Grand Chapter Congress is a fraternity-changing experience. That's the way I talk about Grand Chapter Congress when I talk to collegiate chapters, especially the ones that haven't been here. You guys, I know you all want to come back. You need to start planning for it now. But I'm also charging you to go back to your chapters and encourage them to come to Grand Chapter Congress, because it will be a fraternity, a lifetime fraternity changing experience for you, and you are the only ones that can go back and sell your chapters to that.
Falling in lockstep here with the rest of my brethren, ditto. If we're not having fun, then why are we doing this? None of us would be here if we didn't enjoy what we do and the people we do it with. You go to the leadership events and get networking opportunities, but you do that because you have fun at those events and you make friends at those events. Every one of us has told you that probably our closest friends are Deltasigs that we probably met at Grand Chapter Congress. I talked about the fraternity remaining a fraternity because there have been lots of talk about the fraternity versus a club thing over the last few years. In my address to the Grand Chapter, we're committed to this remaining a fraternity. Fraternalism, social, networking, things like that, that's what we are. We're business students, we're brothers, we're friends. Let's enjoy what we do. If we don't enjoy it, we shouldn't be doing that.
Please give these leaders a round of applause. Sorry. Hold on, that's all right. I thought you handed off the mic because you didn't
Time's up.
have any thoughts.
I just want to say, take the enthusiasm you get here, take it back to your chapter with the most positive attitude. And always remember, those that are critical of you and try to do things to you are the people that do the least. Ignore that in the chapter and everywhere, alumni chapter. But I want you to encourage everybody to come to lead school. This is the big event, but your lead and provincial meetings are very important. You've already got the date set for the next 2 years. So go back to your chapter and let's make that number that the brothers here were talking about a reality. It's everybody come and participate. It's very, very important. Thank you.
Well, I look forward to seeing everybody tonight to have a good time. And now I'd like to provide an opportunity to have photos taken with all the past Grand Presidents right over here. Again, please give them a round of applause.